Hello there, welcome to lesson number 9 in our series on using FluidDesigner for 3D printing to create rings. In today's lesson we're going to show you how you can use a gear tooth to create a ring. So if you start off FluidDesigner, first thing we need to do is to go to Learning Projects, Jewellery Projects, Rings. We're doing lesson number 9, so scroll down. So it's 09 gear ring, so you can drag that onto the workspace. I'll just switch on the screencast keys, so they should be displayed here. Just adjust these panels slightly, and if we just zoom in, this is the object that we're going to create. It's not as smooth as perhaps it could be. The reason for that is if we make this much more smoother, if we add more faces to it, it'll increase the file size quite dramatically, and we don't want to do that from the point of view of distributing the software. But we can show you how to make this smoother as we make it in this tutorial, in this lesson. So what do we need to do? Well, we need to add a mesh, add gear, and then gear. So if we go to add mesh and gear and then gear, and then if we just view and zoom to selected, you can see what the basic object is. It is a gear tooth, okay, and it's actually, if we count them, it's actually got 12 teeth at the moment. So again, if we look in the help panel here, we want to change the number of teeth to 5 for this lesson, so we just click down here. So number of teeth, that's pretty obvious what that value is going to change. Now the second parameter that we can change is the radius. Well, the radius is usually the distance from the center to the outside of the object, or almost the outside of the object. If we look at these values here, the x dimension's 2.134 millimeters. Well, that's actually the diameter. These values here, x and y, are the diameter. So the radius is currently 1. So the diameter is just going to be 2 and plus a little bit. Okay, so the radius probably goes to this point here. And what we'll do is we'll change that. We need to change it to 10. So there we are, 10 millimeters. And as you can see, that's opened it up. It's changed our x value and y value. So x value is actually exactly 20 at the moment. So in other words, the distance from the outside here to the outside at that side is exactly 20. So our radius is from the center here to the outside of this bit here. We've got 5 teeth, so here's 1 tooth, 2, 3, 4, 5. So here's a tooth, so the outside of this tooth to the outside of the part between the tooth, that gives you an x value of 20. We are going to have to change the internal diameter of this later, so that's not vital. So the radius. So what's the next thing we want to change? Well, the width. At the moment it's 0.2, so let's see what happens when we change the width. Well, you can see quite clearly what's happening. As we increase the width, the height, as we're looking at it, of this object changes, of this gear. So the width, we want it at 2, so I'm going to type in 2 mm for 2 millimeters. Now notice in the properties panel that the value for Z for this object is 4 millimeters. In other words, it's 2 millimeters up from the grid, the width 2 millimeters up from the grid, and 2 millimeters down, giving you a total height, a total width of this of 4 millimeters. So you do need to be aware of that. Next thing we want to change is the base. Now at the moment it's 0.2, we want to change it to 1, so let's look what happens when we change the base. Okay, well, it's filling it in. Now depending upon the object we're creating, we might want it to do that, but for a ring we don't want it right in like that, so we want to change the base to actually 1 millimeter. So we've got a 1 millimeter thick ring. That's what we're trying to create today. So we set it at 1. Now the next value we're looking at is the dedendum. So let's have a look at what happens when we change that. Well, the dedendum is moving the part between the 2 teeth inwards towards the center. So the bigger this dedendum value, the closer the part between the teeth is to the center. We want to leave it at 1 millimeter. So, excuse me. So dedendum 1 millimeter, so that just moves it in a little bit. So it gives us the tooth profile. We can still see it with the dedendum value of 1. Now the addendum is 0.1 and we want to leave it at that, but let's just see what happens when we change it. Yep, what it does is it just adds more volume to each of the 5 teeth. We clearly don't want to do that if this is a ring, so we're going to leave it at 0.1. So we can now close that panel down. Now if we zoom in, what we should notice about this gear tooth is that there is no inner part to it. This is just a shell. If we look at it, it's just a shell with no real thickness. So the way to add thickness to this is if we can add faces all the way around the inside here, that will give us a thickness equivalent to this amount. And so that's what we're going to do next. We're going to add faces around the inside of this object. Well, to do that, we've got to first of all press the tab key to go into edit mode. Now at the moment all the faces are highlighted. Well, the way to select all or deselect all is A on the keyboard. So A selects all, A deselects all. And if I now click the right mouse button, I want to change the selection mode to vertex select. And you can see these dots have appeared, these vertices have appeared. If I hold down the shift key and select the 4 vertices there, 2 at the top and 2 at the bottom, what I can do is I can fill that bit in. I can add a face there by pressing the F key on the keyboard. And if I were to repeat that all the way around this object on the inside, I would give it some thickness, this thickness here. Now this is a slow way of actually doing this. It's not impossible, but it will take a bit of time and it's quite messy selecting all those vertices. So there is another way of doing it. Well, first of all, I'm going to press, with the face still highlighted, I'm going to press X on the keyboard and delete that face. And I'm going to show you another method of doing this. And the other method is, if we can highlight the rim around the bottom of this gear and the rim around the top at the same time, there's a special command which will add faces between those 2 rims. So in order to highlight the rim, I need to switch from vertex select mode to edge select. And I do that. First of all, let me deselect that point. Did that with A on the keyboard. So I click the right mouse button. So I want to change from vertex select mode to edge select. Now if I zoom in and if I click on the edges, you can see I can select one edge at a time. To select the whole rim, the way to do that is to hold down the Alt key on the keyboard and click an edge. And when you do that, you can see that the whole of the rim, the top rim, is highlighted. So if I just zoom in now, if I hold down the Alt key and click an edge on the bottom, the whole of the bottom rim of this object, there we are, the whole of the bottom rim of this object is highlighted. Now the way to highlight both of them at the same time, it's not just to hold down the Alt key, but you've got to hold down the Alt key and the Shift key at the same time. And then if we click on this edge here, notice that the top rim is selected, but the bottom rim is also still, if I just move it around, the bottom rim is also still selected. So I've got the top rim selected and the bottom rim selected. So I'm in edge select mode. I've got the Alt key and the Shift key held down at the same time, and I can click on those 2 edges, those 2 rims of my gear. Now what I'm going to do is to add faces between this. Now we do recommend that you use the FluidDesigner menu, which is this menu system here for beginners to learning how to do 3D printing. But you should be aware also that FluidDesigner behind the background is Blender. And the tool that we want to do next, the command that we want to use next, is actually a Blender command that doesn't appear on FluidDesigner. So we need to change this menu system from FluidDesigner to Blender. And we do that by clicking on the plus sign in the top left corner, and then clicking this icon here, which is to show the Blender interface. And when we do that, this menu system changes. There are still some similarities, obviously, but there are some extra commands, in fact quite a lot of extra commands, many of which you don't really need to use. But the one that we want to use in this lesson is we've got those two edges selected on our mesh. So if we go to mesh and go to edges, there is a command here called bridge edge loops, and it makes faces between two or more edge loops. So when we select that command, you can see that what we've got is we've added faces all the way around the inside of that object. Okay, so that's in the Blender menu system. So we can switch back to FluidDesigner by clicking on the Blender icon again, and close that down by clicking in the left hand corner. So you can see the menu for meshes has disappeared now. So to open it up, click the plus, click Blender, that gives you the mesh interface, the mesh menu. Click the Blender icon and click the icon next to it to return to FluidDesigner. Okay, so we can now come out of edit mode, so I'm going to press the tab key on the keyboard to come out of edit mode. Now the next thing we might want to do is to smooth off the edges of this object. If you look down at my finished one, it's not quite as severe an edge as this current gear tooth is. So this is going to be a ring, so we don't want sharp edges. So to smooth this off, we're going to use a modifier, and the modifier, oops, I need to select the gear at the top, not the one at the bottom. The modifier that I want to use is called a subsurf modifier, and the subsurf modifier increases the number of surfaces for the object and smooths it off. So if we click subsurf modifier, you'll see that it changed. I'll just cancel it again and you can see what happens. So subsurf modifier, the object changes, and this one now is the same as the finished object at the bottom. If we want it even smoother than this, what we need to do is to change the view value, so the number of subdivisions. And you'll see as I change this, it smooths it off and smooths it off. The downside to that, of getting it really smooth, is the file size increases quite dramatically. But it probably would be the right thing to do if you're printing a ring, because that's really quite nice and smooth now. When we switch it down to view of 1, it's a bit more chunky. Okay, so view of 5 probably would be the best. The downside to it is the file size goes through the roof, and we didn't want to send that out when we distributed the application. So we're going to leave it at 1. To apply this modifier, we need to go to Tools, Object Tools, and convert it to a mesh. We can now delete the original one, so press X on the keyboard and delete it. So there we are, there's our ring. Now the final thing that we ought to do really is to measure the internal diameter of this ring, and if we needed to, we could scale it up. We could scale it up using the S key on the keyboard, and if we added a cylinder and used the cylinder as a guide, we could resize the inside of this ring to whatever size you want on your finger. Now I'm not going to do that here because we have done it in other lessons. If you see some of the earlier lessons in rings, you can see what to do. You basically place a cylinder on the inside and scale this object up or down. All we're going to do now is to save this, so we're going to go to File, and remember, always go to Save As, go up through the menu system. It's Jewellery Projects Rings, so it's 09 Gear Ring, and we save that as a Blender file. We can't print Blender files, so we need to export it in the wavefront format, and we're going to export it to the desktop as 09 Gear Ring OBJ file. And you do always need to go to Netfab Basic and open up this file from the desktop, this gearing file, and we haven't got any warning red triangles, but we always recommend you go to extras and repair the part. And I'll just move the window across. There are no edge problems, no orientation, no holes, just one shell. Netfab, however, will have triangulated this mesh, so we always recommend you run automatic repair and apply the repair and remove the old part. Okay, so Netfab has checked that mesh, it is okay for printing. All you need to do now is go to Part, export the part as a wavefront object, export it to the desktop, and 09 gearing repaired. That's the file that you would send to the printer. Okay, so that's it. That's the end of today's lesson. How to use a gear tooth to create a ring. Thank you.